Hey, this is Sharon Raji Maynard, and this is my new podcast, Gazelles and the Phoenix. So why gazelles and the phoenix? Well, there's an old quote that says, I'm going to stop focusing on the dinosaurs, just let them die. Instead, I'm going to focus on the gazelles. Gazelles are those individual projects and organizations that are rising up out of the ashes, even before the dinosaurs are gone. So I have had the wonderful experience of meeting a lot of gazelles, being in company of those who are holding space as the phoenix rise from the ashes. So this podcast will be episodes to share with you those individuals, those groups, those ideas. Some of them will come from monthly meetings that are sponsored by the patrons of my other podcast, A Mystic's View. If you're interested in becoming part of that supportive community, go over to patreon.com/A Mystic's View. And there you can get details. We're a growing community. We're committed to a collaborative mindset, and it's a joyful experience. So thank you for those patrons that enable me to do this podcast. And I'm excited to share with you gazelles that are rising up like phoenixes from the ashes. This episode is a continuation of the panel of presenters that the Patreon community called A Mystic's View supported. And we have our last panelist, which is Rivera Sun. You're on, Rivera.
Thank you, Sharon, for inviting me to be a part of this beautiful gathering, and for each and every one of you for joining us this evening. I'm not a grandmother. Although through fate and circumstance, I am going through menopause at a very young age. So it's like kind of like being on the fast track. I hope I can live up to the pressures of wisdom in that category. But it is a deep honor to be with you all and to hear these amazing speakers share their wisdom and to get a chance to listen to you later on. I am by nature a storyteller. I write novels like The Dandelion Insurrection and The Way Between.
Really?
What I do in the world is I spend a lot of time sitting in those liminal spaces that Gemma spoke about so beautifully, and listening to the stories that want to be told and the stories that we're yearning to hear, and finding a way to translate to people across the country through the written word. I really very deeply agree with Muriel Rukeyser, who said that the world is not made of atoms, the world is made of stories, and that we as human beings, we weave these stories into ourselves, into our own beings, into our communities and families, and into the way that we see the world. And if we want to see change in the world, we literally have to change the stories that we're telling. One of the big story shifts that is occurring right now is something that is being called the old story shift to the new story, which is almost like a joke because the new story is actually a very old story that many of us knew before the time of domination and conquest, colonization, extraction and exploitation, patriarchy, misogyny. The list actually goes on. Racism, oppression. Not that human beings were perfect saints before the rise of these times, but that we bought into a story, many of us, that these kind of behaviors were acceptable, that these were the ways that we were going to survive, some of us, and that they were necessary. But what we're finding is that not only are they completely unacceptable, but they're completely unnecessary, and in fact are leading us to our very demise and destruction, that they're causing intense pain all over the world. They're causing intense pain to both the people who are being harmed by those stories and the people who are doing the harming through those stories. So we're looking for the new old story, the new ancient story, maybe I'll say, which has more to do with recognizing that we are an interconnected web, that impermanence is constant, change is the only constant, that there are ways to live sustainably with deep love and appreciation and respect on this planet, that equality is a way of awakening our own depth of being, to see through the eyes that respect means to look again. There's a whole world of story that is opening up for us, and there's a whole breakdown of old stories that almost everyone I can't say almost, every single one of the people on this call have literally lived through. You have seen the demise of stories that were as constraining and constricting as fences and corsets and cages and prisons. You're seeing the need to keep deconstructing those bars of stories and to keep moving through into the space where this new story is possible. And as someone who's only 36 years old, I have to just stand here in deep love and appreciation for all the work that you have done. We feel like we're complete failures in this world because there's so much left to do, right? But from my vantage point, as I heard you guys say, the shape of my life was made possible by the work that you did in yours. That moves me to tears, literally. And as someone who was born in the breakdown of old systems, I find it very exciting. I love to say to people, I was never brought up to believe that white picket house with the guy who's the breadwinner and the dog and the two kids named Dick and Jane, I was never brought up to believe that would be my life, that would ever work, that was a reasonable story to live into. And so I was given permission to dream up new stories and to recognize that this is a time when we are going to dream together and we are going to change the story. We're going to shake the very foundations of the world's story and say there is something that wants to break through the concrete you have put over human beings and the earth and come forth like new life. These are the stories that we're telling, the ways that we are deconstructing the old and making space for the new. And it's so beautiful and profound and humbling and invigorating. And the one piece of the story that I feel we need to tell more is that we're not living in a kind of Jane Austen sort of story. We're not really living in a Stepford Wives kind of story. We're living in a hugely epic moment of human storytelling. It's massive. In fact, I like to joke that The Lord of the Rings had nothing on the drama of this moment. That the scope of the story that we are faced with, the crux of this human plot, is that we are going to have to rise up with all of our heart and all of our spirit and all of our soul and live in a time that is the stuff that myths are made of. That's those descendants of ours, either emotionally or wisdom-wise, biologically, that we're all striving so hard to ensure a future for. The stories they're going to tell about us in this time period, nobody's going to go to sleep during them. They're going to be amazed at what these stories are. We have to remember that we're living in them. And kind of like Frodo and Sam on the way to Mount Doom, it wasn't a very comfortable story for them. We'd love to watch it on the big screen, but for them, it was very frightening, uncomfortable, painful at times. It forced them to reach into the depths of their hobbit souls and pull up the best of themselves, and to do it with one another, which is a very important part of the story. That great heroes are not made by standing alone. That lonely hero mythology is a lie. In fact, Sharon Blackie, who's an amazing wise woman, who says her one quibble with Joseph Campbell's hero's journey is that he goes it alone, which is a very kind of male thing to think about. And that her feminist lens says the feminist hero's journey isn't a solo's journey. It's what we're doing right now in the circle. If you look on the gallery view of all these screens and you see all these good friends and companions that you have along the way. And the last thing I'll close with is just that an examination of struggle and change and transformation in our world actually bears this out. that the other piece of the work that I do is in nonviolent struggle and organizing for nonviolent change. And we had a study come out in 2011, actually, that compared violent revolutions and nonviolent revolutions and found that not only was nonviolence working, it was working twice as often as violence, in a third of the amount of time and with a fraction of the casualties. And the magic ingredient that makes nonviolent struggle work so well is participation. That when we show up, when we remove our cooperation from the old system and put our loving support into the new system, empires literally crumble, dictators topple, systems of domination and oppression vanish from the face of the earth, corporations cease to exist. And what comes up and rises up in their place is the dreams and the hopes and the aspirations of literally millions of people around the world. These are the kind of stories that I read about in real life. These are the kinds of stories I write about in my novels. And these are the kind of stories that I aspire to be part of in my own self, in my own character, and with beautiful people like you. So thank you.
Thank you, Rivera. Thank you for listening to this episode of Gazelles and the Phoenix. Gazelles and the Phoenix is a result of the contributions made possible through my Patreon community of The Mystic's View. In that community, we are committed to creating a mindset that opens us to new ideas, that models the value and strength that comes through diversity. And as you have listened to the podcast today, here is one voice, diverse, unique, definitely part of weaving and building a new world. So thank you for being here with us. If you'd like to consider supporting, give us a high rating on any of your podcast platforms. Go over to patreon.com/A Mystic's View. Consider supporting and being part of that community. So thank you for being here. Blessings.